All right, I want to talk to you about the Stone Age, and we'll begin with the Old Stone Age, which is called what? What's the term we give to the Old Stone Age? Paleolithic, as opposed to the New Stone Age, the Neolithic. And it's within the beginning of the Old Stone Age that we find the discussion of human evolution. So this is probably the best place in our curriculum to address the idea of human evolution. So I want to go through what anthropologists believe and talk about some of the problems, some of the evidence that's put forward, and so on. When you talk about human evolution, most evolutionists begin the story with the lemur. This is a mouse lemur. And so it looks kind of like a mouse, right? But it's not a mouse. It's in a tree. It has opposable thumbs. And what takes us from a mouse to a more human-looking creature is not only the opposable thumb, but also the face. See how the snout is much shorter, how the eyes are on the front of the face? Normally when we think of a mouse, we think of the eyes being on the side of the head. And so what anthropologists are trying to do is they're trying to explain how humans have developed into the form we see them today from these earlier primates, and then they try to develop a scenario, a story that would explain what would cause these mutations and these changes to occur. Well, the most common story that they tell of how a mouse or early mammals become primates is that they climb trees. This is the most likely story in their scenario. And so when animals are on the ground, they need a long snout to create longer olfactory lobes for smelling. They also need to have eyes on the side of their head so they have more peripheral view and they can see what's coming and trying to eat them. However, whenever the conditions changed and they began to lose food sources on the ground, then animals began to die off. And the only way that these animals were going to survive if they could find another food source, some other way to survive. I know I don't want you guys to believe this, but I want you to know the scenario because this is evolution. If you're dealing with evolutionists, these are the kind of things they believe. So they needed an alternative food source, and that food source was in the trees. If they could just find a way to get up into the trees, well, mice are not designed for climbing trees. They're designed for scurrying along the ground. However, if there were mice or early mammals that had mutations, mistakes in their genetic code that allowed them favorable characteristics to where they could effectively climb trees and reach the food that was there, then they would reach the food, they would eat it, and they would survive, and they would pass on that favorable mutation to their offspring, and through time, you would develop different types of organisms. And so they believed that within the mouse population, there were mice that evolved that had eyes in the front of their face, and their nose was shorter, and their thumbs were opposable, which allowed them to grasp. I mean, if you can imagine, this is where it gets so bizarre, because in my mind, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like. I'm trying to take the story and just put it into my head and see it. So you've got all these mice that are scurrying around on the forest floor. They look up and they see the food, but they can't get to it. So they try to climb the trees, but they can't grasp it. They don't have opposable thumbs. And so it takes a while until a mutation occurs where there's a mouse that's born that has his claws turned like this, which allows him, when he grabs, to get a hold of the tree, and that allows him to get up higher and higher and higher till he can grab a leaf and eat it. And then, since he can do that, he's more likely to survive. And so he'll survive, and he'll find, well, when Darwin wrote Origin of Species, that was his first book. His second book was what? You guys know Darwin's first book, Origin of Species. What was the second book? Nobody knows? The Descent of Man. And that's where he actually describes human evolution. Origin of Species is not about human evolution. It's about the process of evolution. Descent of Man is about human evolution. And what's interesting, in the Descent of Man, he doesn't talk about natural selection. He talks about sexual selection. And that's important because imagine that there's a mouse who develops this mutation, allows him to grip the tree and to climb up, and he gets plenty of leaves and he eats it. That's fine, but what does he need to pass on his genetics? He needs a wife. He needs a female. And so there's always that process. Not only has to get to the food, but he's got to get girls to like him. I'm thinking with a mutation, that could be a problem. There's something wrong with that guy. He's got these strange claws. I'm not sure if I want to date him because he's got strange claws. So he began to develop other methods of attracting females. Read Descent of Man. So peacocks with the big tails. You're trying to get the female's attention. And so the fact that he could bring down leaves, I guess, would probably get him a lot of girlfriends because they're starving to death. And so the point is that he's going to have a longer life, more likely to have offspring, and so on. And so that genetic mistake that caused the claws to form, the opposable thumbs will be passed on to his offspring. And if there's another mutation, pretty soon through time, voila, you have thumbs. And that allows them to climb up to the top of the tree. And so you can see these lemurs have thumbs. You see it? That allows them to grip the tree. You can see he's gripping the tree. He's climbing it. And so he can get up and grab the leaves and eat them. Now, one of the problems when you get up into the limbs and you're jumping from one limb to the other, you have to be able to judge depth. Because if you're a lemur and you're saying, okay, how far is that limb? I think that limb is about 2 feet, 3 feet, something like that. But it's hard to judge because your eyes are on the side of your head. You have to turn like this. Yeah, about 3 feet. 3 feet. I think that's about 3 feet. And so he leaps for the limb, but it's not 3 feet. It's 8 feet because he's having a hard time with depth perception. So he falls down and breaks his neck. And that's the end of that because he didn't have the depth perception. And so there's another mutation that develops that allows the eyes to move from the side of the head toward the front of the head. And as the eyes move toward the front of the head, the field of view begins to overlap. As it overlaps, that creates depth perception. And so now he can actually judge more accurately the distance to the next limb, and that allows him to survive rather than falling to the ground and killing himself. And so as the eyes move around from the side, you have better depth perception and survival and so on. And so because they're up in a tree, they don't need the long snout anymore, so that begins to disappear. The eyes move to the side of the face, and so what's happening is you're beginning to develop a more human-looking face, right? Look at the person next to you, his face. They don't have a long snout, do they? Their eyes aren't on the side of their head. They're in the front of it. We recognize that as a more human-like skull. So how did that human skull form? I've just described it to you. Living in trees, okay? So living in trees causes a shorter nose, like you compress the nose, the eyes move to the side of the face, and opposable thumbs, and we're beginning to move toward a human-looking creature. And so this is a lemur, somewhere between the early mammals and the primates. Lemur hand. See the thumb?